Our second story out front, a top Republican in Pennsylvania drawing criticism for touting the state's new voter ID law as a path to victory for Republicans.
Voter ID, which is going to allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania. Done.
He was speaking there to an audience of Republicans. John Avlon, Roland Martin, Reihan, Salam are with me. Roland, hey, you thought it was just Florida. Nope, going to bring it right up to Pennsylvania. So, John, this is the new law. It says that all voters will be required to show photo ID before they vote. That is what this law is about, quoting directly from the voter ID law. So Democrats say this hurts turnout among minorities, among elderly voters, people like that. Republicans say it's to prevent voter fraud.
Look, Erin, everybody wants fair voting without fraud. But this guy, the head of the Republicans in the Pennsylvania state legislature, pulled the curtain back. Because all those high-minded reasons, all these principled reasons allegedly for passing this law, he just said, and I take him at his word, were really about partisan gain. They're about the pursuit of power. And this is why people are sick of politicians. Because they use all this supposedly principled reasons, and it's nothing about except power and partisan gain.
You know, Roland, this brings me to the tough issue, because I think most people would say, look, you should be able to have an identification of who you are and where you're from to vote. But that is intimidating to some people. Why and to whom? I mean, how can this law become something that is discriminatory?
But it's not just Pennsylvania, it's Florida, it's Ohio, it's 18 states. And so many of these Republican legislatures have been doing this as a result of ALEC, that secret group. They were behind a lot of these different efforts as well. The bottom line is this here. It goes beyond just saying you need an ID, because they're even saying in the Pennsylvania law that you need, to prove it, you need a birth certificate with a raised seal. If you don't have that, you've got to go get one, a non-waivable fee of $10. If you want a Pennsylvania photo ID, that's not a driver's license, that's going to cost you $13.50.
Right. They're saying, I mean, all voters have to have a photo ID. So you're saying if you don't have one, the formal one costs $13.50.
Right. And so this notion of voter suppression goes far beyond voter ID, because so many of my Republican friends have been saying, oh, just show an ID. But it's limiting early voting days. In Ohio, you can't vote 3 days before the election. Why? Because they're targeting those black churches as well. And so they have come up with creative ways beyond voter IDs to keep people from voting all across the country.
All right, Reihan, what's your response to that? And do you think that having a photo ID should be okay? And if you do, wouldn't you admit it should be free?
Oh, I definitely think it should be free. And in fact, if you look at Mississippi, for example, where the voter ID laws have been put in place that are quite strenuous, quite rigorous, they have said that free voter IDs will be issued to anyone who requires one. And I think you see that in many of those states that Roland has cited. And I think that if Pennsylvania finds that there are many people who can afford the $13.50, they should absolutely take affirmative steps to provide those voter IDs for people. What I will say, however, is that when you listen to what the gentleman said in Pennsylvania, you have to keep in mind that there are many Republicans who believe that voter fraud benefits Democrats. There are also Democrats who believe that voter suppression and voter fraud benefit Republicans. We don't know that. What we do need is a neutral, straightforward process in which there is a reliable way to identify whether or not you are who you say you are.
Right.
And when you see there's a history of voter fraud in this country, Justice John Paul Stevens, when he voted as part of the majority, the 6-3 majority in the Supreme Court to uphold Indiana's voter ID laws, said that as well. There's an extensive and long history of voter fraud in this country, and he, lest we forget, was one of the liberal lions of the Supreme Court. This is not something that was made up out of whole cloth.
Let me just
offer some facts.
Yeah, let me just Roland, let me throw something up here, because voter fraud, I mean, look, it could be widespread. I don't know, but convictions on voter fraud, there have been 4 in Pennsylvania since 2004. Obviously, the president's margin of victory was more than 600,000 votes in 2008. So, I mean, I'm not saying we know every case, but 4, Reihan.
Erin, here's the issue we have right now.
Raja Ratnam was not the only person who ever engaged in insider trading. But the thing is that it's very hard to identify and prosecute insider trading. There are many crimes where you don't necessarily identify all of the people, and we're not trying to engage in some kind of process where we're prosecuting, we're intimidating, etc. We're just saying that going forward, let's have a neutral, reliable way to be sure that people are who they say they are. And I think that, you know, we're not trying to go back and engage in any recriminations about the past.
This is a solution in search of a problem. The National Republican Lawyers Association came out with their report showing voter fraud. About 340 cases in America, over a 10-year period. If you look at some of the
states... How many
states,
cases of insider trading relative to insider trading incidents?
One second, I'm offering actual proof.
Is there no white-collar crime in America because we don't prosecute it?
One second.
Let him finish.
There are some states where you have a better chance of getting hit by lightning than there actually being voter fraud. And so this is utter nonsense.
Then to be prosecuted.
Look.
Then to be prosecuted, Roland. Let's be clear.
Look, let's be clear for a second and pull back. We know there's been a history of voter suppression in this country using voter ID laws and other things like literacy tests. We know that. We know there are also cases of voter fraud in this country.
Voter ID laws and literacy tests are not the same, John.
No, I'm saying, listen to me. I'm saying we know there are cases of voter fraud and there's also cases of voter suppression. Both of these concerns are rooted in American history. But what we've seen in our recent history is a lot of supposedly principled reasons with nothing but partisan gain to back them. This same guy, the Republican head of the state legislature in Pennsylvania, backed an effort to try to rejig the Electoral college vote in their state to split it up, to again make it more likely that Republicans could gain electoral votes. So this isn't about principle, this is about power.
Erin,
Nebraska and Maine are states where you want to separate it out because it's a diverse state, and I think there's some concern about that in a variety of states. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's something corrupt about it, John.
Hey, Erin, you want to hear corrupt? In Ohio, they actually passed a bill which the voters repealed and then they overturned it, where in Ohio, they said if you were a poll worker, it was voluntary for you to tell someone if they were in the wrong location. If they were in the wrong polling location, you could tell them tough, or you can choose to tell them. Why would you even put that in the law? Why are you banning people from voting 3 days before an election because you're targeting churches who are voting in mass? It's utter nonsense, and they can't defend it.
Thanks very much to all three of you. We appreciate it. And Roland Martin's been working on a documentary on voter suppression in America, going to air on July 15th here on CNN. And out front.